Bonsoir, mon nom est Maude Prudhomme, analyste principale des programmes d'engagement des intervenants et de sensibilisation du public au Secrétariat fédéral de lutte contre le racisme. Merci de vous joindre à nous via Zoom ce soir.
Outreach and Anti-Racism Secretariat.
To ensure a successful Zoom meeting tonight. For people calling in and joining us only by phone, unfortunately, you will not be able to speak. You will only be able to listen to the conference. However, you are welcome to send us your questions or comments by email after this session. For people joining us via the Zoom, we have attached a user guide which you can refer to if needed. Seulement pour les personnes qui se joignent à nous via l'application Zoom, cette session
For
offre
people calling in and joining us on Zoom, you will be able to access simultaneous interpretation by choosing the language at the bottom of the screen.
other streaming services to dedicate all your bandwidth to this meeting. Make sure to clearly identify yourself with your display name. Look for the three dots on your screen and select Rename. This will help us better identify participants that have sent a question. La plupart d'entre vous qui participaient à cette réunion avaient été inscrits dans la liste à titre de participants.
If you are registered as a participant, you will be in a position where your audio and video feeds have not been enabled. Attendees that will send comments or suggestions will be promoted to panelists to be able to speak should they want to.
If you wish to speak. Submit a comment using the questions and answers box Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. An organizer will identify your comment. Our moderator, Dabo Ahmed Omer, will say your name and ask you to raise your hand using the raise hand button. An organizer will promote you to panelist, enabling you to unmute yourself, activate your camera, and then speak. Très important, cliquez sur le bouton Lever la main seulement si Dabo vous demande de le faire.
Only use the raise hand function if Dabo gives you the opportunity to do so. Have a great conference, and I'd now like to turn it over to my colleague. Thank you very much, Maude. Good evening, everyone.
I would like to introduce Claudette Commanda.
First of all, I would like to introduce Claudette Commanda.
Annie Commanda, je vous offre du tabac afin que vous nous conduisez vers la prière.
I will be back to you after the prayer.
Elder Commanda.
Thank you, Peter, for the passing of the sacred medicine of tobacco, Chimi Wedge. Merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
I'm very honored
Je suis honorée d'être présente avec vous ce soir pour inaugurer cette réunion, pour vous accueillir et pour vous bénir afin que vous puissiez bien commencer votre session.
speaking about racism, anti-racism strategies, initiatives, and innovation, and in particular in the business world. And it's important that we speak about this topic in all segments of society. But that being said, I want to say thank you for the protocol and the passing of the tobacco. It's an honor to be here with you. I see some wonderful people. I see those that I have not seen in a long time. So very honored to be here. And it is said when we come together, we ask for help from the highest power, which is the Creator. And it is said when we come together and we have ceremony by the lighting of the sacred medicines, and that is to bring in that good energy. That is to fill the space with that, to make it a safe space. And therefore everyone is comfortable, everyone feels safe to share their knowledge, to share their concerns, to share their wisdom, and that we all learn from one another. But importantly is to build that space on respect and kindness. And the sacred medicine that I will light and that I will use for this ceremony is sage. We are not together in a room for this sacred ceremony. But we are together through this virtual platform. And even though we are not together face to face, nevertheless, the fact that I'm lighting this sacred medicine, holding this ceremony, brings us together. It brings us together with that one mind, that one heart, one spirit, and one determination. And that is to do the good work for all, good work for Indigenous peoples, good work for Canadians. So I lift this medicine in a good way, and I show it to you, all of you, that you are part of this ceremony. And I say, Chimigwej Kishimanado Onje Mishkiki Migwej Kani Michkishigun Kinuna Dishinakas Gitaganzi Bidonjibon Bijajiko Ma Nishnabe Kio Mama Wenenewag Bijajiko Ma Nibuksendam Endaso Kijik Onje Kakina. And I begin now by saying a prayer in my language, and then I will say words to explain what this prayer is said. It is said that when we are responsible for our sacred medicines and for our ceremony, we must always use our language, that first breath that the Creator blessed this land with, the first knowledge, the first history, the first culture, the first language, and the first people, the First Nation people. And I am Anishinaabe, I am Algonquin, so I will use my language. Gijiminado, Miigwej Kina Kego, Miigwej. Miigwej Jojo Aki, Miigwej Mishomiskizis, Miigwej Kokomista Begizis. Anabagis Gijiminado, Wido Kwishnan Onje Kakina, Nichkiwe Dogashish Anishinaabe Goma, Nongoma Shishwabang. Nibuksendam, Minapamadzuin, Zagi Edwin, Ashish Mashkawiziwin, Nibuksendam, Gijiminado, Chimino Tagozoin, Nongum, Miigwej Gijiminado, Anabagus, Daspinigan Kokomisag, Daspinigan Mishomsag, Miigwej, Nijenwen Daganago Mama Weniniwa, Miigwej. Creator, we give you thanks for bringing us together. We thank our Mother the Earth for this beautiful sacred medicine. We thank our grandmother the Moon and our grandfather the Sun, those sacred elements that are here for all human beings and for the animal, the plant life, and the water life each and every day. We come together, Creator, as brothers and sisters in this circle, and we acknowledge you. We say thank you for what you've blessed us with. And it is my prayer for the people who are here, Creator, that you bless them with strength. Bless them, Creator, with kindness. Bless them, Creator, with love. Bless them, Creator, with that good life to them and their families, and safety and protection today and tomorrow. And we thank you, Creator, for your blessings. Chi Miigwej Gijiminado Miigwej. Toutes mes amis, bienvenue ici à la territoire ancestral.
And to all of my friends, welcome to the ancestral land of the Algonquin people. I wanted to give you words of welcome and blessings.
Brothers and sisters, and I welcome you to this beautiful homeland of my people, the Algonquin people, Chi Miigwej. I acknowledge the ancestors of my people, and I acknowledge all your ancestors. I acknowledge all the Indigenous lands that we are on at this moment as we come together, all the participants in this session. So thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me. And those words of prayer that were said in the language, they are for you. Continue that good work. And how we will combat that racism is together with that one mind, that one heart, one spirit, in kindness and respect, and using that wisdom and knowledge. And let us walk hand in hand to build a good future for the most important ones, and those are our children of today and tomorrow. So, Chi Miigwej, thank you. Miigwej.
Thank you very much, Elder Commander, for the prayer and the words of wisdom. It is indeed through holding hands, working hand in hand with kindness and respect, that we can come together and make a dent and try to eradicate racism across the land that we now call Canada. So hello everyone, and welcome to the virtual town hall on business investments in anti-racism strategic initiatives and innovation. As I said, my name is Peter Flagel, and I am the Executive Director of the Federal Anti-Racism Secretariat. Let me begin by expressing the extent to which it is a tremendous honor for us at the Federal Secretariat to join you this evening with the Black North Initiative and the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, and such an impressive array of members of the business sector in this timely dialogue. As some of you may know, the Federal Anti-Racism Secretariat is a brand new entity within the Government of Canada, responsible for leading a whole of government approach to ensuring that the federal government does the right thing in eradicating systemic racism, including anti-Indigenous and anti-Black systemic racism. This means working with and mobilizing all departments and institutions in the government and across the board to remove systemic barriers, to identify gaps, to understand the impact of our actions in order to advance responsive initiatives that are better tailored to addressing the needs and realities of communities directly affected by racism. So really, we operate as a hub, a convener, and a catalyst to scale up and accelerate federal action in this area. But we also understand that the struggle against systemic racism cannot be done in isolation from key sectors of our society. For starters, the voices, experiences, and realities of communities that are directly targeted by racism, Black communities, Indigenous peoples, Asian communities, and many other racialized and religious minority communities, their voices need to be centered. They need to be at the table when the policymaking process is taking place. But also, systemic racism is complex and a multifaceted beast, which requires that all sectors of society come together to design collective strategies for collective change. And that is why we're so happy to be with you this evening. We have, for example, watched in the space of really just a few months, watched in awe as the Black North Initiative has, excuse the words, taken the country by storm, and really mobilize in such an incredible way the highest echelons of the private sector to commit to tackling anti-Black systemic racism. As we say where I'm from in Quebec, c'est du jamais vu. In my lifetime, I've never seen
As they say in French, we've never seen it before.
Example, a model for the types of actions that can be considered. And so there's much for us to learn from the work that you are doing, the Aboriginal Business Council is also doing, and also at the same time recognizing that racial barriers persist in terms of access to employment, retention, promotion, and the list goes on. But also, and this is where there's good news, and this is exemplified by what you are doing today, and that it is important that we also have recognize that we have a unique opportunity with such an incredible national attention on anti-racism to collectively make a dent and really be effective in eradicating systemic racism across the board. C'est pour cela que ce soir, nous sommes réunis pour nous pencher.
That's why we are coming together to talk about ways that the business sector in Canada, as we emerge from COVID-19, can make strategic initiatives to support the Black community and the Indigenous communities and religious minorities in their efforts to combat racism and meet the challenges of their generation. I'm very, very pleased to be with you today as the co-host of this next 2-hour discussion, and I want to thank
for partnering with us and co-organizing this landmark event. This is part of our efforts of the Federal Secretariat of bringing the federal government closer to racialized, religious minority communities and Indigenous peoples and demonstrating federal leadership in this area. So without further ado, it's a great honor for me to present Wes Hall, who is the Executive Chairman and founder of the Kingsdale Advisors and one of the co-chairs of the Black North Initiative, who will be delivering some remarks and a presentation.
Get in the car.
I can't move.
I've been waiting the whole time. Get up, get in the car.
Mama.
Get up and get in the car right.
I can't.
Now let's turn to the United States, to the city of Minneapolis. The city is still reeling from the death of an unarmed Black man in police custody.
I am George Floyd. I am Ahmaud Arbery. I am Angelo Ku. I am too many names to count. And these are just the names of those whose lives were cut short. What about the names of those whose lives were made harder, whose success was stifled, whose value was diminished, whose hard work wasn't rewarded, who fear for their families, who know for them it's just different? The names of those who live with the pain, the burden, and the terror of anti-Black systemic racism every single day.
We live in a time where Black men and women and boys and girls can be choked and shot and beaten and lynched in broad daylight by murderous pigs.
Their time is long overdue. We can't be silent anymore.
Take your knee off our neck!
We can't delay another day. And make no mistake,
So they are frustrated.
this isn't just an American
There is
issue.
no systemic discrimination.
It's a Canadian one too. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And it's not enough to just not be racist. We need to be anti-racist. It's not enough to just stand in solidarity. We need to move in solidarity. It's not enough to just condemn. We need to transform from the inside out as individuals, as families, as communities, as companies, as a country. Black North is a call to action. It's a movement in the making, and it starts today. We're mobilizing the corporate community to not only transform itself, but to transform the country, to move as one, to end anti-Black systemic racism once and for all. From the boardroom to the classroom and everywhere in between, there is no limit to what we can accomplish together, and the time is now. The world has put us all on notice, and we will answer the call with courage, with commitment, with collaboration and level we haven't seen before, because this is the fight of our lives. So welcome to Black North. Let's get to work.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, and thank you for inviting the Black North Initiative here to this wonderful discussion. I'm going to start by, you saw the video, it talks about anti-Black systemic racism and whether or not it exists in Canada, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous racism. We often hear folks talk about this is not a, why don't we just put everyone in the same bucket? And we hear the term racialized, for example, which means that everyone who is not white should really fit into this bucket of racialized. And the question is that really a fair way to categorize and put everyone in that bucket? And I'll give you an example of why we should consider that and why we should really be specific about the problems that we're trying to solve. And the focus really is on Blacks and Indigenous people, and why we should actually look at those two groups and do what we can to make sure that those groups are brought up. And if they're brought up, then there's nobody else to actually bring up. I live in a very prestigious neighborhood in Toronto, in the Rosedale neighborhood. And last week, my wife works went to a retail store in the neighborhood. And those who know this neighborhood, it's a predominantly white neighborhood. And my wife, who is white, went to the retail store, the grocery store, and the package was too heavy. And she said, my boys are gonna come to pick it up for me. And they're gonna come tonight at 7 o'clock. This was last Wednesday. And my boys went to pick up the package at 7 o'clock as the appointment was set for. And as soon as they walked into the store owner was there with a guest, with a customer, and both of them screamed out loud because they thought my boys were there to rob the store. And all they did was just walked in. They didn't say anything at all. They just walked into the store like any other customer would walk into the store. And my boys said, I'm Christine Saul's son, we're here to pick up a package. And the store owner kind of calmed down a little bit, but the customer was still frantic and was worried that these boys were there to harm her. And so that's really, what do you do in that particular situation, right? Is that person a racist? Not really, because that person is used to hearing a narrative that put Black folks in a negative position, right? Or that person may have, if it was an indigenous person walked into the store, they've seen an indigenous person put in a negative position. 30.4% of the prison population, federal prison population, are indigenous people. 8.5% are Black people. But yet, so those are the negatives. But when we look at the positives, like the top of corporate Canada, there's no representation. When we look at the very nicest neighborhoods in the city, there are no representation. When we look at the COVID-19 cases, the 5 most hardest hit COVID-19 cases in the city of Toronto are Black neighborhoods. And they represent 22% of the cases, but yet they only represent 9% of the population in the city of Toronto. So that's really setting the tone for what I really want to talk about. And it's really about optimizing our workforce and optimizing our population. So I'm going to use 3 things to determine that. I'm going to ask, what does the light bulb, Queen's University, and the Toronto Raptors have in common? Those are very, very different things. So let's go to the light bulbs. This gentleman, Lewis Howard Latimer, was born in 1848. Now, Lewis Howard Latimer, parents were escaped slaves in the US. But he gained experience as a patent boy at a law firm. I started my career on Bay Street in the law firm in the mailroom. So same with Latimer. But his boss kind of recognized that this Black kid has talent. So he promoted Latimer to head's draftsman in the department. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell, who we all know as Canadians, employed him to do the drawings to get the patent for the telephone. Everybody knows that Thomas Edison invented electricity. What people don't know is Latimer made it better by creating the filament. He was the one who invented that. So as a result of the filament, we have all these beautiful bright lights in our cities as a result of this man. Again, this man is a Black man. He was born in slavery, and somebody saw his talent, recognized his talent, and look at all the beautiful lights we have in the world today as a result of this man's talent and somebody recognizing his talent. Queen's University. Queen's University today is known as a white university. But I'm going to talk about Robert Sutherland. Robert Sutherland was a Jamaican man who immigrated to Canada. And back in the day when he was born in 1830, you don't really immigrate the way that people immigrate, especially when you're a Black person. So he came to Canada. And he was the first person of color to graduate from a university in Canada. He graduated in 1849. And Sutherland won 14 academic prizes in Queens. He was excellent in debating. And he just kept on winning prize after prize because he was an amazingly smart man. And again, he was a Black man. He graduated in 1852 with honors in mathematics and classics. And he actually went on to study law. And he qualified to study law in 1855 and became British North America. This is the US and Canada's first Black lawyer. Can you imagine that? We had our first Black lawyer that was here in Canada, that was an immigrant. And little people don't really know that because we don't really celebrate that. We're the first and we haven't really celebrated it. This man, Sutherland, practiced law for over 20 years in Walkerton, Ontario. And he died in 1878, and he left his entire estate of $12,000 to Queen's University. Well, why was that $12,000 so significant? Because a few years back, Queen's University, their entire endowment was wiped out because of the collapse of a bank. This was the largest donation, individual donation that the university ever received. And if they didn't receive that donation, Queen's would not exist today. But yet it's referred to as a white university, but nobody knows that it was a Black man who actually saved it until this day. Now, why did this man give his estate $12,000 of all the places that he could give the money to? Why Queen's? He told his friends, Queens was the only place where I was always treated like a gentleman. He gave them his entire estate because he was treated like a human being by that university. And yet he was a scholar. He was smart. He had 2 honors degree and went on to practice that to get a law degree and practice law. And yet, could you imagine all the experiences that he had and Queen's University, that education that he had and how he was treated was the one that he remembered the most because they treated him like a human being. What does the Toronto Raptors have in common with this story? Well, the Toronto Raptors, I'm a basketball fan. I think there's a lot of basketball fans on the call here. And I hated when the Raptors would get knocked out of the playoffs. Every year they would get knocked out. And I remember calling Masai Ujiri, the president of the Raptors, and said, Masai, why doesn't Coach Casey, the coach of the Raptors, play the bench players? And he said, I don't know, Wes. But he got fed up eventually, and he fired Coach Casey, and he put in Nick Nurse. That year, the Raptors won the championship. The Raptors were known as the deepest bench in the NBA. They had all these players that were sitting on the bench that Coach Casey wasn't playing before. And guess what? They as a result of that, they were able to win the championship because they were able to optimize their bench. So what does that really mean for us? For us, it means that if we do not optimize our population, optimize the use of the talent that we have the indigenous population in this country represents 5% of the population. Black people represent 3.5% of the population. That's 8.5% of the population sitting on the sideline, sitting on the bench, not participating, not given an opportunity to win, to shoot that winning basket. So what we're saying is that Canada is really known as a diverse society, and we pride ourselves on saying that. But that diversity ends in certain parts of our country and our economy. It ends at the very top of corporate Canada, and it ends in certain neighborhoods like the one that I live in. And we're saying that if we fix that, Canada will become the envy of the world. When people are looking for different places to raise their families because they're fleeing conflict from where they are, and they're going to look at us if we can fix our issues with respect to systemic barriers that causes people of color and Blacks and Indigenous to move ahead. We're going to be able to attract the best and the brightest, and that's really what we need post-COVID. We're going to go into a massive recession, and we're going to need the brightest minds. We're going to need people like Latimer, people like Sutherland, people who can think outside the box and think differently to help us to get out of this. And if we do that as a society, our society is going to recover the best, and we're going to have the brightest talent come into us. Right now, we're talking about immigration and how we're going to be able to attract immigration. We can attract people here, but we cannot attract them and get them to drive taxi cabs for a living because they're not getting opportunities in corporate Canada. So as business leaders, I'm gratified in the fact that we have over 400 companies in this country, some of the largest companies that have signed up to the Black North Initiative to say, on principle, I am going to make changes within my organization to make my organization a truly inclusive organization. And as a result of that, we believe that we can live up to the promise of being an inclusive and a welcoming society. So that's my remarks. We're gonna have a nice debate and discussion on the issue. And I thank you again for the opportunity to be here and to listen to this presentation.
Thank you very much for those very enlightening, powerful, and sobering words, reminding us the real realities that we face, but also the opportunity that we have collectively to bring about change. And so now I believe that our next speaker is Tabitha. Tabitha, are you with us?
Ani?
Great.
Ani? Buju, Tab Indigenous Niptin Dujaba Mijisi Dodem. Thank you, Chimagwech, to everyone for being here. Thank you, Elder Commanda, for your opening and for starting us off in such a good way this evening, for sharing the language and for acknowledging the first people that were here before us and those that walk and care for the land that we live on every day. Thank you, Wes, for sharing your personal story and the personal stories you shared with me and with so many others in the past. They make a real impact. I'd also like to thank the Federal Anti-Racism Secretariat for hosting this event and to our event partners, Black North Initiative, for ensuring that there's a space for Indigenous voices and unique perspectives. It is important that we distinguish that as Indigenous people, we have rights that are affirmed in the Constitution and a unique relationship with the Crown as nations. However, we are all treaty people. We all have a role to play in this journey. So thank you to everyone in attendance today. I recognize that we are all spending way too much time in front of our screens, and depending where you are in the country in this particular moment, many of your families or partners may be sitting down to dinner while you are on your screen yet again. As we close out an unprecedented 2020 with a still uncertain future, I want to reflect on where we are today and this moment when we are awake. Add to the powerful video we just watched names like Colton Bushi, Joyce Echaquan, and Barbara Kentner. Many have finally woken up to our history, to social injustice, and to the reality of the stark social economic gaps and inequities that exist for Indigenous, Black, and people of color, for women, and for 2S LGBTQ+ people. It may seem a simple statement, but the late John Lewis said, when you see something that is not right and not just, you have to do something. We at CCAB have lots of ideas of what that something is, but we have extremely knowledgeable leaders and partners on the panel this evening who I'm certain will provide the something. I want to speak to a few core principles that I respectfully ask you keep in mind this evening and moving forward. It isn't that we haven't been here before. In fact, we've been here time and time again. Some of the most important moments in history happened in times of stress. This is our opportunity to ensure that history does not repeat itself, and instead to arm ourselves with that history and that truth. Without truth, there is no reconciliation. Of course, this is not meant to be a history lesson. By being here tonight, I recognize that the audience is educated and enlightened to the histories of residential schools, to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. However, there's this excellent book by Bob Joseph called The 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. I want to highlight a few of those that you may not know that are specific to business. From 1881 to 2014, the Indian Act contained a permit system to control and forbid First Nations' ability to sell products from farms. This originally was with respect to agriculture, but as livestock became a commodity, it was also included in addition to the control and often objection to permit the sale of farm machinery to First Nation people. In 1880, an amendment was made to the Indian Act, which required compulsory enfranchisement for anyone who obtained a degree of Doctor of Medicine or any other degree by University of Learning, and this remained in force until 1951. Effectively, this excluded First Nation people from the economy until our very recent history. I must respectfully state that this is only an example of the impact on First Nations, and the history of Inuit and Métis people, while similarly exclusionary, is unique and must also be recognized and acknowledged. Despite that, we have persisted. There are currently close to 60,000 Indigenous businesses in Canada, in every sector, every province and territory, and they are being created at 9 times the rate of non-Indigenous businesses. And we are doctors, lawyers, engineers, electricians, innovators, and entrepreneurs. And we are the fastest growing population in the country. But this is also about allyship. At CCAB, we have incredible corporate members who have been with us for almost 40 years, who are committed to growing the Indigenous economy along with us. Through procurement from Indigenous businesses, through creating equal equity partnerships, through building strong, respectful relations with Indigenous communities, and through creating safe and respectful spaces for Indigenous people to work, learn, grow, and lead. I give the most respect to the many corporate leaders that have signed on to the Black North Initiative Pledge. Many of those same organizations are our members and are certified or committed to our Progressive Aboriginal Relations program. As leaders, it is imperative that you lead your organization the entire way through this dialogue and journey. But it also must be a whole organization conversation. The conversation and action needs to happen in every department and at every level. If you dip your toe in the water, it will create a ripple for sure, but after a short time, the water will be calm again. If you cannonball into the water and make a bigger splash, it will take a little longer, but the water will be calm again. What we need is to create constant wave and to be comfortable with the water being choppy for some time to come. Brené Brown wrote, "People are opting out of vital conversations about diversity and inclusivity because they fear looking wrong, saying something wrong, or being wrong. Choosing our own comfort over hard conversations is the epitome of privilege, and it corrodes trust and moves us away from meaningful and lasting change." So thank you once again for being here for this vital conversation. Miigwech.
Thank you so very much for those very important words, reminding us that we're all treaty people and that we have a duty for reconciliation. And there's a tremendous potential and potential and innovation already taking place within Indigenous communities that is essential for the growth of our country. And next, I have a great honor and pleasure to introduce la co-animatrice de notre session. So the next speaker I'm delighted to present is Dahabo Ahmed Omer, no stranger to the federal government, currently the executive director and panel moderator. So executive director of the BNI, of course, and the panel moderator for tonight. So Dahabo, welcome.
Thank you so much, Peter, and welcome to all of you. I am beyond grateful to be among some of the most esteemed and pioneers in the struggle against anti-Black racism. I think this conversation is incredibly important, and I thank all of you for taking part in this. Also, Peter and the entire team, as well as Melissa and my entire team, and everyone at Tabitha's team, we have been through a lot this last couple of weeks to get this event organized. As we know, some of the discussion points and the recommendations that are going to be made are going to be very critical in the way that we advance in this fight. And so I want to say a special thank you to the organizing team. A reason to care. All we have to do is really give everyone a reason to care. So I'm going to give you one. We're all in this together. The march to freedom is a very, very long road, but the miles that we have journeyed together is already a testament to the human history that is being rewritten. As we speak today, as we are part of this conversation, you're rewriting history, and so thank you. I believe that we can end anti-Black racism. Once we know what we believe, I know that we can do something to act. The Black North Initiative is on a mission. It's a mission of unity in action. It's an initiative that intends to eliminate anti-Black racism and systemic barriers negatively affecting Black Canadians across this nation. Corporate Canada was bold enough to take the challenge to add gender diversity to Canadian boardrooms and executive suites by declaring policies, setting specific targets, and holding itself accountable, and is now well on the way to reforming the system. We believe that it's now time to do the same for Black Canadians. Our vision is simple. We believe in an equitable future for Canada, where all Black Canadians can achieve their full potential, free from systemic racial barriers. And to achieve this, Black North Initiative has been leveraging Canadian business leaders, partnerships to public and private sector, social sector, and we are using the power of Black communities. Together, we work to remove anti-Black racism from our systems. We are using the systems of healthcare, housing, justice, education, economic empowerment, employment, and all others in order to do this. I can tell you that in the last couple of months, we have done a lot of work. To date, we have over 400 organizations who have signed the pledge. 30% of TXS 60 companies have signed the pledge, and the total market cap of all committed organizations exceed $1 trillion. This is representing of almost 1/3 of TXS total market cap. over 83% of our signatories are corporate. Some are nonprofit, others are government, hospitals, universities. And if we look at our pledges based on revenue, 61%, over 61% are from large companies. This is all in less than 6 months. And I can see Wes is going to smile in a second because he knows what I'm talking about. Through this incredible work, our signatories, our partnerships, our communities, and our devoted volunteers with the Charter of the Pledge, the Black North Initiative has been able to achieve great milestones. I'm going to start with one of them. Wes Hall, who's our executive chairman and executive chairman of Kingsdale Advisors and the founder of Black North Initiative, also my boss, has just been featured in a new Harvard Business School case study. That's a rare honor, an extremely rare honor that a few leaders in Canada have achieved, and one that positions anti-racism at the core of the business learning agenda. The case study is called Wes Hall and the Black North Initiative. This is something we have never seen before. Our pledge right now is working to build pipeline so that we have representation of the Black community on board of directors and C-suites. In addition, we are looking at how do we now provide a real impetus for change. We've made a goal out of minimum 3.5% of executive and board roles based in Canada being held by Black leaders by 2025. And let's look at beyond the pledge. Many of our signatories have not only made the commitment to change, but they've also gone above and beyond. They have set unprecedented social impact goals with commitments of billions of dollars for marginalized communities. They have tied compensation to diversity, inclusion, and equity goals. They have created diversity and growth funds, and millions of dollars have been committed. They've also set tangible and achievable diversity, inclusion, and equity goals. And a lot of them now, and for the last few months, have been launching various recruitment processes to ensure representation, all through the Black North Initiative pledge. The impact has been great, and it's been beyond our wildest imagination. But we believe that together we can achieve. And so in December, the Black North Initiative will be launching its first national fundraising campaign to continue to do the necessary and important work to accomplish real systemic change in all parts of our society. By 2025, I promise you, we promise you that the landscape of our society will look completely different. And so today, we are very, very lucky to have esteemed panelists who are leaders in their respective sectors and who will share their thoughts, their expertise, and provide recommendations on what we can do to advance the equity conversation. And so I will present all of our panelists, and then I will pose one question to each panelist, and then I will open the conversation to all of you, as I know you will want to join in. Alicia Dubois is a proud Indigenous professional who joined the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation from CIBC's executive team, where she developed and implemented the CIBC's Indigenous Market Strategy and Framework. Alicia is also the co-chair of the board of directors of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business and served as a member of the board of trustees of the Royal Ontario Museum. In 2019, Alicia was honored with the National Aboriginal Trust Officers Association inaugural award of distinction. Welcome, Alicia. Leanne Hall is the Chief Executive Officer of Creative Fire, a national 100% Indigenous-owned Indigenous strategy engagement communications design and research agency. Creative Fire is a proud member company of the NED group of companies, a 30-year Indigenous Economic Development corporate of English River First Nation in Saskatchewan. I was gonna say it in French because I'm Francophone. Leanne is a board member of the First Mining Gold and is also a member of the Board of Governors in Wilfrid Laurier University. Welcome, Leanne. David Sharp. David, who's also part of the Black North Initiative, is a Mohawk and a member of the Mohawks of Bay Quinte. David is a Chief Executive Officer of Bridging Financing, Inc., a lawyer, and was appointed to the Board of Directors of Historica Canada and Futurepreneur Canada, where he is the Vice Chair. He is the Chair of Emeritus of First Nations, University of Canada. He is the board member of the Economic Development Corporation of Ibamtung First Nation. He's also a member of the Board of Trustees of Queen's University and is the Chair of the Dean's Council at Queen's University Faculty of Law. Welcome, David. Mark Maroney. Mark joined Scotiabank in 2018 and served as the vice chair in corporate and investment banking. Prior to joining Scotiabank, he served as co-head of equity trading and head of equity capital markets with National Bank Financial Markets. Mr. Maroney currently serves as the director of the board of Jarlowski Fraser. He serves on a number of nonprofit boards, including the Black North Initiative, Boost Child, Youth Advocacy Center, and the Sinai Health Foundation. Welcome, Mark. Paul Desmarais. Mr. Desmarais has been
Mr. Desmarais
since 2017. He acts as the chairman and CEO of Seagard Holdings, the executive chairman and the co-founder of Portage Ventures, and the chairman and co-founder of Diagram. He is the chairman of Wealthsimple and Dialogue and a director of Coho and Greyhawk Investment Strategies. He sits on the board of Groupe Bruxelles, Lambert, and Imerys. Mr. Desmarais is the founder and the honorary chairman of Young Canadians in Finance. He now sits on the board of Alpine Canada and the Glenbow Museum. He also sits on the board of the Black North Initiative and chairs the Next Canada Images Board of Advisors. Welcome. As you can see, we have some of the most incredible individuals in our society, in our community, that are here to share some of their thoughts. And so normally we would be clapping, but we can't do that. So I'll start, okay, well, I'm gonna clap. And so I'll start with Alicia. As you know, 67% of our First Nations, Métis, or Inuit-owned businesses have reported being highly impacted by a decreased demand for products and services compared to 62% of other majority-owned businesses. What do you think can be done to further support these businesses?
Miigwech. Thank you very much for having me. I'm sorry, I hear feedback. I want to thank very authentic opening and also to Tabitha. It prepares us all to have genuine conversation, which is really important as we talk about these important topics. So thank you. I'd like to share a few key facts about Indigenous businesses just to set the stage. And these facts come from the research of the CCAB. Indigenous businesses contribute approximately 31 billion to Canada's GDP annually. There are over 50,000 Indigenous businesses in Canada. 99% of those businesses are small to medium enterprises, so they are particularly vulnerable in circumstances such as those we are experiencing with COVID. Indigenous businesses come in a variety of forms. Entrepreneurial in nature, varying in size and level of development. And then there's also economic development corporations. And these, for those individuals who aren't familiar with the concept, are corporations that are constituted by Indigenous governments in order to drive economic development, own source revenues, and employment within their communities. So these businesses really are akin to, say, crown corporations. What's important is that we have learned that approximately 25% of Indigenous businesses, being small to medium-sized enterprises, are not well positioned to survive a sustained closure of more than 30 days. While this is obviously detrimental to the businesses themselves, the real challenge behind the scenes is that it creates a serious echo effect of vulnerability for the Indigenous population. And this is because Indigenous businesses are known to employ a higher percentage of Indigenous peoples than other businesses, and are also known to give back to their community in very significant ways, especially in the case of economic development corporations owned by Indigenous governments. Therefore, when Indigenous businesses suffer or must completely close, there are serious negative echo effects that are felt widely by Indigenous people in what are often already vulnerable, underserved communities. So now that we find ourselves, I think, probably firmly in the second wave of COVID, and we note that the impact is likely becoming more severe in a larger number of Indigenous communities, the impact is particularly notable. And that leads to a need for added supports. And we're familiar with some of the supports. We've seen the government funding programs that support access to capital via traditional financial institutions, and those are vital. Another approach, which would be obvious for me to discuss, is being the CEO of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, is to talk about models that involve government supporting Indigenous investments in the economy. And specific to the mandate that I am now driving, the beauty of this is that the transaction and supporting the investment obviously is the foundation of what we do, but it's that halo effect that comes out of the transaction that really starts to drive Indigenous wellness. And that's because it drives, it offers an opportunity for engagement in skills development, employment, and supply chain opportunities. So it's a very useful and effective platform to support partnerships and active Indigenous engagement in the economy. I think what I want to touch on most, especially in light of Wes and Tabitha's introductions for us, is that now is the time for a new era of partnerships. Partnerships are and will continue to be key in driving Canada's economy generally, but it will be particularly important when we are ensuring that vulnerable, marginalized people and businesses in Canada are supported, welcomed, and engaged. We need them to be positioned to add much needed value and perspective in our markets and in our communities across the country. Also, it's these partnerships and it's this engagement and this enhancement and positive narrative that is developed out of the partnerships that will only serve to attract greater investment in Canada's economy generally. So while we're creating partnerships that appear to support Indigenous access to capital and Indigenous wellness, it really is a win-win circumstance for everyone involved. So I'd like to focus perhaps first on corporate alliances and highlight 5 ways that large corporations are well positioned to support the Indigenous economy and create that win-win circumstance. And of course, we know that it's important to do so. Specifically, we recognize that there are pressures that are relatively new to us that are becoming very important for us to respond to, such as ESG pressures. So the 5 ways that I would like to highlight for us as we think about the way that we can engage Indigenous peoples and businesses in an effective way in order to drive not just the Indigenous economy, but our broader economy more effectively. I'll start with procurement. So procurement policies that support diversity in supply chains are particularly important. The challenge here is that it requires a commitment. And I'm going to refer back to Tabitha's analogy of the ripple effect. The challenge here is that many large institutions, in order to drive meaningful diversity in their procurement policies and in their supply chains, will require a revamp to their policies and to give space for real diversity in their supply chain. Typically, the typical process now is that outsourcing procurement is prioritized based upon bottom line. And this approach works to actively edge out vulnerable businesses and peoples even further. The other thing that I would like corporations to consider is to build diversity into your own business development strategies. I think here I can refer back to my experience with large banks. What I think corporations might find most effective is to take diversity and inclusion programming out of your cost centers and make them part of your business growth. And I mean across various lines of business. You'll be surprised at how robust this market space is when you begin to engage in it. And that's something that I know from experience. And ultimately, what this requires, especially if we're going to talk about financial institutions, is enhancing what you already do best, and that's access to capital and building wealth for individuals and Canadians, and tweaking it so that you understand the unique nuances of Indigenous businesses and lending on and off reserve to that segment. In being more effective in driving your client segment in this way, you'll also find that it's much more easy for you to hire and retain Indigenous employees because they'll feel confident to get behind the business. Another way that I think corporate Canada can serve marginalized groups better is to take advantage of the employee diversity groups that most large institutions constitute. What I have observed is that generally the employee diversity groups tend to be wasted, high-value resources that would actually allow you to be innovative in solving a lot of the challenges within your institution. Your employee base within these groups know your weaknesses, and chances are if you're a leader, they know your weaknesses better than you do because they live within your teams and they deal with the systemic barriers that are built within the lines of business. And that's not just in colleague interactions, but also in the way that they observe colleagues treating vulnerable clients. And of course, I'd like to talk about board positions, and this goes back to ESG pressures. Diversity at the table is key in order to moving the dial. This is where I think we are able to move ripple effects to choppy waters that really drive change. It's important to have those diverse opinions at the table, and it's important to ensure, as Tabitha was talking about, that those diverse opinions have an open space to be able to share their experience and create meaningful change. The last item that I think is worthwhile considering is creating internships for Indigenous entrepreneurs. Internships are an important mechanism by which typical non-employees get a chance to enhance key skill development. And the beauty of that is it means that these individuals leave the large institution and go back and are in a position to be able to take that skill level and create stronger, more resilient Indigenous businesses. In addition, while they're part of the team, it's a great way to tap into more knowledge about driving effective business development efforts within those unique and often marginalized client segments. Chi-miigwech, thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to be able to share my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Leanne. You know, sorry, Alicia, there's so much that you have said around, you know, procurement and their policies and how do we start to create real diversity and how do we look at our boards and our leadership roles and how does that trickle down to ensuring that we're building the pipeline around our internship and, you know, and it's very much aligned with what we are doing at Black North, and it just speaks to the intersectionality and the interdependencies that exist between anti-Indigenous racism and anti-Black racism. And so thank you for that. My next question is to Leanne. Leanne, how do you feel that we can create some specific actions or targets or goals that are designed to support our communities as they strive to end systemic racism? What are some of the opportunities that we can create for all those that are in the underrepresented communities and specifically in the Indigenous and Black community?
Good evening, and thank you. I'm joining tonight from the traditional territory of the Six Nations of the Grand River and Haudenosaunee people. My name is Leanne Hall, and I'm the proud CEO of Creative Fire, which is a 100% owned Indigenous consulting, engagement, and strategy firm out of Saskatchewan. So it's an honor to be with everyone today. So to talk about that we really start by listening. And when we listen to our communities, we can hear them share their priorities and focus for the future. So again, shifting the focus from us talking about our own companies to what are the communities, what are the conversations, what's important for them. So your organizations can then build your plans around how to support these communities moving forward and helping them meet their priorities. So here are some things that I've been hearing, from Indigenous people, communities, and businesses, and some messages I have for corporate Canada and organizations tonight. So one, leadership commitment. I think we're all going to hear the same themes here. So to ensure, that we have that leadership commitment from the CEO and board chairs, to commit to these highly actionable targets and goals around Indigenous reconciliation and prosperity. This includes, not just about setting those goals and targets, but actually creating implementation plans and accountability around those plans. That's critically important. And obviously, I'll piggyback on Alicia's comments about at the board table. Absolutely, Indigenous people need to be included on your board and in senior leadership roles. And I'd like to actually flip the switch a little bit, that if we look at, who are champions of board diversity, I ask you to look at Indigenous economic development corporations, Indigenous organizations. They're champions of having, extremely rich and diverse board and then senior leaders as well. And so I think it's really important, again, to look to community, to look at Indigenous companies, and learn from them in how we apply, diverse leadership. On employment, really, really extremely important that we have a plan for career progression of Indigenous people throughout your organization. It's about giving the ability to advance and progress in your company. So this is extremely important as we move forward and unleash, all the wonderful talents of Indigenous people. Supply chain and procurement. So for sure, there is a high barrier to entry in the procurement process. We really need to ask Indigenous businesses what needs to be done to eliminate those barriers and how we can all support them to be successful. Even for ourselves as a organization, sometimes the cost of just putting together an RFP can be close to $40,000. Again, it's taking us away from the good work that we're trying to do. So what are the things that you can do to eliminate that? Do some coaching, do some workshops. Those things are extremely important. My next comment around, really procurement and supply chain. Don't try and inquire of our Indigenous companies to meet your client supplier diversity goals. Support us, mentor us, help us scale, invest in us. But don't try to assimilate us into your organizations or your companies. And that's what I see happening is a lot of, offers to acquire. But again, it takes us away from what we are unique and designed to be doing in the marketplace. So support us, mentor us, invest in us, and help us scale. There are incredible opportunities for joint ventures and partnerships and equity participation in Indigenous communities. And one really exciting thing that's happening, and I can see a lot of opportunities for that intersectionality, is really around collaboration in the supply chain. So can we get 8 or 10 companies together and start jointly bidding between, the organizations from Black organizations, Indigenous and people of color? How do we come together and start really working together and bidding on and winning, huge projects across this country? That's the future, is really about that mutual collaboration and partnership. The last area is around corporate social responsibility. Again, the key message is to help communities in supporting their community goals. As we report to our shareholders, we should also build and develop key performance indicators with our communities and report on the progress of these outcomes to the community itself. I know many communities now are doing scorecards on their corporate partners. So again, develop those shared goals, the common goals, find ways that we can report not only to our shareholders, not only to our employees, but also to our community partners to ensure that they prosper as well. So thank you very much for inviting me to join you this evening.
Thank you so much, Leanne. You know, there's so much that you said that resonated with me. I mean, engagement is such a big part of this work, making sure that we are centering Indigenous people and people of African descent in the way that we advance, in the way that we create programs or services or initiatives. How do we ensure that those that are most impacted with lived experiences are represented in the creation of some of these strategies, right? And so, and you're right. I mean, and I've heard Wes and others say this before. You know, we shouldn't be fighting for the pie. We should be building. Should get in the kitchen and build a bigger pie and make sure that everyone has a piece. And that that speaks to your comment around working collaboratively, right? How do we share the accountability, but also share success? And so coming together and putting in an application or bidding together, that just ensures that everyone is resourced in the way that they need to be, right? And furnished the way that they should be. And so thank you. The next question will go to Paul Desmarais. Paul, with a great focus on the proliferation of anti-racism movements across Canada and their significance to the business sector, what do you think the business community and government can do collaboratively to support these initiatives while supporting grassroots communities?
Super. Thank you so much for the question. I think it all starts with acknowledgement. Can you hear me properly? I think it all starts with acknowledgement, and ultimately, you know, one second, guys, you guys both need to leave.
Papa,
I'm speaking.
I think.
Sorry, guys.
I think you're time.
No, guys, you guys have got to. Apologies. It's what happens when you have 4 children at home. But you know, I think first and foremost is acknowledgement. And you know, I think, you know, my own journey was actually quite interesting on that front, where I would say before the summer's events, you know, I was really blind to this. You know, I actually had no clue that there was as large of a Black community in Canada as there was. I had some generally good idea of, you know, the racism against Indigenous communities, and I'd spent a bunch of time actually working with the Cape Dorset Art Center in terms of its reconstruction, but, you know, really was ignorant as to a lot of the general issues that were happening in Canada. And in fact, you know, I might even say I was probably part of the problem. And the events over the summer were extremely eye-opening for me. And actually, what was extremely eye-opening was the combination of the events over the summer and discussions I had with some of my internal team members, a Black man who was one of my stars in my legal department. And that combination really made me realize, wow, like we have a real issue. And what's interesting is that, you know, when I think about the corporate sector, I think actually the Black North Pledge is actually a really interesting guide. And in many ways, it's a guide that I've followed for my organization. And so, you know, I thought the best way to share what I think the corporate sector should probably do is just tell you a little bit about what I've done in my organization and what we are in the process of doing, because I think that's, you know, the best reflection of what I think the corporate sector should do. I mean, the first thing we did, you know, I liked the comment earlier on diversity groups and it being kind of a misallocation of resources. You know, I formed a diversity group. I chair the diversity group, and my direct involvement on the diversity group makes it important. And we have a lot of our team leaders on that group. That group initiated a measurement process where we basically ran surveys of our employee base, figuring out where did we have diversity gaps. And ultimately we identified diversity gaps in Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ, women, and veterans in our kind of employee base. And so once you identify that, you know, we were like, okay, so what are we going to do about this? And what targets are we going to set? I mean, effectively, we set the target that 50% of our new hires will be of those groups. And we will not conduct any interview process until 30% of the candidates at least are either Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ, or female. I work in the world of investments which tends to be a very, very, very kind of white male world. And I'd say, you know, I take pride that our organization's already one of the more diverse in our sector, but I think we could be way bigger than that. Ultimately, what's interesting is we also set targets about retention, because ultimately someone mentioned earlier the importance of career progression. And career progression is actually really critical, because if you could attract diverse people, but then they feel that they're not progressing, they're going to end up leaving, and you end up having retention rates with your diverse team members that are lower. So we set a standard that our retention of diversity will be the same as everybody else's. And then finally, we set targets at our partnership. So in our organization, senior leaders are called partners, and we set a target for a certain percentage of diverse partners within 3 years. And what's interesting about all that and this diversity committee is it actually surfaced a whole bunch of issues. And someone said earlier that, you know, often it's you need to rethink and remake your systems. And I love the procurement analogy, because I'm ready to bet that in a lot of corporations like ours, there's a line in your procurement that says, like, you shall only procure from companies that have at least kind of 3 or 4 years of financial records. Well, guess what? You know, any entrepreneur or any diverse group that's not already owning a business is not going to have 3 or 4 years of financial records. And so there's a whole bunch of lines in procurement policies that are fundamentally, without you knowing it, or without the intent, exclusionary. When we kind of analyzed our kind of public facing approach, we actually found that our website had to be redone. Our job descriptions had to be redone. Our recruitment process had to be rehashed. You quickly realize that actually a lot of the elements with which you operate as a firm are actually, without you ever intending to be, a little bit exclusionary. You know, if you have a website where the photos of everybody on the website are white men, that doesn't send a really strong signal to people to come and kind of apply to your firm. And so all of these things are things that we're reworking as an organization. And I think that large corporations have a big opportunity to kind of do that and rethink that and include people as they think about those things. And so finally, after measuring, setting targets, driving impact, moving, you know, a lot of the systems in our organization to try and be more inclusionary, which, you know, ultimately, you know, I rely very heavily on this the diversity committee to guide me in these things, because, you know, I've been part of the problem for a decade. You know, the question then is, how do we share with the community? And ultimately, as an organization, you know, we've concluded that one of our biggest assets is our network. So effectively, what we've done is we founded an organization called the Black Wealth Club. This is a club of 50 young men and women that were actually selected this week, that will have complete access to my organization's network. And we will basically organize monthly events for them to network, and also connect them with you know, different career opportunities, different growth opportunities, and really try and create an ecosystem that allows their careers to accelerate. And for us as an organization, it's a tremendous asset, because as we seek to significantly increase the amount of Black members in our management team, this will be an incredible pool to pull from. Ultimately, in terms of the government, I think the most important thing for the government to do is have clear policies and actually follow up on those policies, which is really important. I think there's also a really important space, you know, in the world that I work in. Open banking is a really big topic. And I think open banking, which is really consumer empowered banking, is actually a great leveling field for the Canadian consumer, and even more so small entrepreneurs. I think the financial system in Canada really struggles to get resources to people that have small businesses or to marginalized communities. If you look at people in northern communities, you know, access to banking services is practically non-existent. And so, or even on reservations, there's very limited access to, you know, full banking systems. And so my feeling is that opening that up, having more digital, leveling the access field, making it more open, allowing people to share information more freely with potential suppliers of capital, I think will be very helpful. And then, finally, I think, the letter that the Maple 8, the 8 big pension plans published yesterday about their united commitment to a set standard in ESG is an incredible initiative. And, I think it did not get nearly enough attention because of the fact that these 8 pension plans from around the country were able to agree that diversity, inclusion, ESG was going to be a main focus for them, and that they were to agree on what standard they were going to actually assess these things by, was an incredible step forward, I think, for our kind of industry, because in terms of myself as an asset manager, it gave me a very clear path in terms of this is the standard in terms of ESG, diversity and inclusion, that we need to follow. And the largest pools of capital in the country are going to be abiding by those standards as well. And so that's a little bit of overview of what I think is the opportunity for corporates. And then I think in terms of government, it's really about having clear policies, so supporting many of the pension plans, and any form of policy that could drive financial inclusion, I think is a very positive policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I want to thank you for first just starting by that acknowledgement. I think it's super important that you're able to state that there was a sense of awakening, that that you did what you could to sort of not only wake up to what was happening, but also do something about it, right? And I remember the first conversation you and I had, and I think you were walking down the street, or you were running, or something was happening on your end. But we had such an incredible conversation, because I remember you saying to Havo, we've got to do something. I didn't realize all of this was happening. I'm talking to my staff, and I'm sorry, and we've got to do something. And I remember you saying that, and I felt the remorse, and I felt the sense of awakening. And it really does speak to how do we now that we've acknowledged this, what do we do? And you've done a really good job at sort of telling us about what are some of the steps that you've taken, and you've shared some of your best practices and things that have worked really well, which is part of our pledge at Black North. And so thank you for doing that. It's been really great to hear some of your points. So my next question is to Mark Moroney. Mark, could you identify ways in which the Secretariat can work with the private sector to facilitate greater coherence, alignment, and coordination with the business sector and civil society as well? How do we aim towards working together to end systemic racism? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I would be remiss if I didn't say, because you clapped for us. We heard from Claudette, we heard from Peter, we heard from Wes, Tabitha, and you, Dahabo. It's an honor to be here, and everything you've all achieved is basically, it speaks to what we're all trying to do here. And then when I think about the panel, Alicia, Leanne, Paul, and David, well, one, I've already learned a long time ago never to speak after Paul, because he's very emotive in how he gets through this stuff, and he really hits at the crux of it, and he really has never been the person who goes around the pod on this thing, so he gets right to it. I will get to your question, but I just wanted to say, I think to answer it, and answer it fully, when you talk about how to identify ways, I would say Wes is somebody that I've been around now for a long time. And the number one thing that he showed me about the Black Initiative, and some of the conversations we'd have even years before that, is to not be rigid. When we were welcoming corporations into the Black North Initiative, it was letting people in on their own terms, and letting them kind of absorb certain parts of the pledge that was signed that they really thought they could affect change on. And I think that's the best part. I think, Dahabo, as you speak about, 400 people, $1 trillion of market cap, all of this, that's the part that really resonates with me. It's that this isn't forced on anyone. This was brought to people, and people rushed to join because we were conscious that there was something that needed to be addressed. And as I think that through, I've heard words tonight such as enhancement, partnership, retention, all these things. All of this is part of and parcel what we're trying to get to. And that's a Scotiabank thing, particularly on the partnership side. But that's really what I find the Black North is really doing. It's shining a bright light on something that maybe some of us didn't know were here, some of us knew, but we didn't know how to act. And it's giving people a medium and a vehicle to kind of move that forward. To answer your question, and I wrote some of it down, so I could probably read some of it again. You said, can you identify ways in which the Secretariat can work with private sector to facilitate greater coherence, alignment, and coordination between Government of Canada and the business sector and other sectors? I think if anyone could truly answer that question, we wouldn't really need to be having this panel discussion tonight. I'd say there are many parts to the question that you pose. So I'm going to kind of focus on two things. I'll start by thinking through the Secretariat, and I did read a little bit about it. You know, the initiative program, which I've been told and now I've seen, is designed to help industries identify, focus, and address employment and skill gaps, including attracting and integrating retaining workers. I mean, this is a critical initiative to truly kind of change the landscape. And I think a lot of the firms at the Black North Initiative are really thinking about that. They're thinking about how do you integrate, how do you retain? Paul discussed that as well. I think these are very important because the landscape that we had before the summer, you know, was sort of stable, and now it's in flux, but for the positive. You know, we've already set at Scotiabank a 3.5% target for the representation of Black employees in senior leadership roles. And we need that also to hold ourselves accountable. It's almost that if it's true that if you can't see it, you can't do it, you can't be it. And I'm very proud of Scotiabank for that, for signing up for that. I'd also say that we also need to be collecting data. I haven't heard a lot about that tonight, but I'm a bit of a data person. I was really struck when Tabitha was mentioning some of her figures earlier. The first thing we need to do is gather that data, relevant Canadian data, better, more precise, consistent tracking, collection and measurement of data. I mean, it's necessary for anything that we want to be in terms of, if we want to have an effect with our anti-racism effort. When I think through maybe how Scotiabank's done some things, well, the first thing I had day two when I got to the bank in 2018 was an inclusion and unconscious bias training. And for me, that was an amazing class. It's almost like when I got there, I was sitting there and I didn't really even know what we were going to talk about. And then by the end, what we were sharing and talking about just proved to think differently, because maybe, as we know, unconsciously, we had picked up a lot of these things along the way. And so for me, that was really important. But what I've also seen now is, yes, we had a plan for championing diversity and inclusion for a long time, but I've seen a renewed effort on those kind of inclusion goals to tackle racism and discrimination. And we've done that through a BIPOC task force, and we've done it with speaking to three sort of verticals of employees, clients, and community. And if I start with clients, we started to look at how we interacted with our clients and the supporting of the operational process. When I think of the community, well, that's probably going to be a larger topic, but we looked at how the bank can support organizations that reflect our internal values. And then when you talk about the employees, we committed to make Scotiabank the employee of choice for diverse communities. And we went through a lot of things to get there. We went through a lot of topics to kind of move ourselves there, but everything from, you know, Paul said maybe some of the group, or actually a few people mentioned that maybe some of these groups and chat boards and all these things, maybe they were just not the right use of the of energy. I'd say from our standpoint, the expansion of the employee resource group, we've done things like that to create a safer place for discussion. And one thing that I thought was really important was we updated the employee diversity survey, kind of to better understand the employee population, but also to make people, I think, feel more comfortable with the questions that there was going to be action. And I think a lot of times we ask these questions and we don't really follow up and try to see and look in the mirror where we can make these changes. And we've seen it at Scotiabank already, just basically to extend the reporting almost to make sure that the visible minority representation includes race and ethnicity as well, and makes people feel confident that we're going to do something with it. So I guess if there was a few key messages, you know, I think we have already been trying at our place, and I hope it's a challenge to everybody else who's involved with the Black North to be thinking through how to make, well, I would say we think we would be the employer of choice when it comes to the diverse community, but we still have ways to go, and we know that, but we hope everybody is kind of thinking in that way. Everybody should think they want to be that. They want to be the employer of choice. That's what it should be. But I think we can drive change in many ways. through our interactions, as we said, clients, employees, and community partnership, but also investment. But our bank is only successful as the society in which we operate. And when there are individuals and communities that feel left out, we cannot feel strong. I think I could say the same thing about all the groups that have signed the pledge. It's not just a bank, it's everybody, it's every person. We can only be successful as the societies in which we operate. And I've seen it and I felt it. And I think we're starting to see that action and that change. And it's truly wonderful to be a part of.
Thank you so much, Mark. You know, I think one of the big things that resonated with me that you said was, you know, this willingness, this open willingness. No one was forced into sort of coming in on board with the Black North Initiative or the pledge, or, you know, my first 2 weeks at Black North was spending all of my days, one call after the other, speaking to signatories and CEOs and founders who were more than anything wanting to know, we want to sign the pledge, but what else can we do? How can we join your committees? How can we do some of the community grassroots work? How do we ensure that we're speaking to government? And Mark, you were one of the first person that put up their hand to say, you know, I want to join the education committee. How do I now support even further? And so I think it speaks to not only taking a step, but then taking the next, and then the next, and then the next, and doing it together, right? And making sure that no one is left behind.
Well,
and so
I could say one thing. I think we are lucky to have you. You're doing a terrific job. C'est un plaisir de travailler avec toi. Ton énergie, c'est incomparable. Merci.
It's a pleasure to work with you. Your energy is just incredible. Thank you very much for all that you do.
I feel like we're going to have a one-on-one conversation now.
J'ai l'impression.
You know what? I wouldn't have been able to do this. It's been only a couple of months, and I'm surrounded by some of the most incredible people. I'm one of the luckiest person probably on earth, and I feel that every day. I think it's hard work, and we are putting our blood, sweat, and tears into this, and all of you are as well. But I truly do feel one of the most luckiest because I'm surrounded by folks who are committed, above committed, right? And so thank you for that. I really appreciate that comment. So David and I had a really good conversation when we first met. And the funny story, we've never actually seen each other. And so when I saw him on video today, I said, hey, David. So it just so happens that, you know, it's meant to be that we meet, face to face today in this way, but we've had some really incredible conversations around what do we do for the business sector? How do we get our communities uplifted and empowered? And how do we now ensure that, you know, governments kind of play in a very important role in combating systemic racism? And so you already know what my question is going to be, but I'll pose it so that everyone knows. From your perspective, what are some of the ways in which the business sector can leverage the strategic investments to support in the combating of systemic racism and improving the lives of Indigenous people, and also inadvertently supporting the Black community as well?
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to see you in person. And I'd like to thank Elder Claudette Commanda, an old friend of mine on the board of First Nation University of Canada, and I was honored to serve with Claudette and the esteemed panelists. I'm enlightened by listening to you all. It's an interesting question that you ask, and it's improving the quality of lives. And I would see the parallels between Black Canadians and Indigenous Canadians. And certainly, to me, it's very pronounced. And I was quite honored that Wes asked me to come onto Black North and to chair the Indigenous Committee and to see how we could learn from all these Black leaders and all these other leaders and apply it to Indigenous Canadians and First Nations and Inuit. So the one thing I'd want to start with is that, and I say this when I speak in groups often, that Indigenous business is great business. We have a lot of stereotypes about us and the way our communities function historically. And I've heard it right across the country, scouring the country, being in business for the last 30 years on Bay Street, is that we're lazy. Indigenous people, we don't want to work. It takes us time, a lot of time to make decisions. And so I look the way I look so I can blend in fairly easily. But I'm from a community here in Ontario called Tyendinaga, the Mohawks, the Bay of Quinte. So people feel free to speak in front of me. And it hurts me. It's disappointing. And there's a lot of these stereotypes that are just so paramount across the country today. So what I'd like to say is we must be open to Indigenous business. As we all know, in Canada, we have a blight on our history. It's the history of the treatment of Indigenous people. We are not full members of society even today. We're not invited into the corporate boardrooms. People do not want to learn our culture. I see it, and where I see it, and I'll look on the CBC website, and you just scroll down to the comments, and that's all you have to do. And I did this as recent as a few days ago, and you see the absolute racist comments about our people when we're trying to better ourselves. And it hurts and it's disappointing, but it's prevalent. So there is aversion to doing business with Indigenous people. So how do we improve the quality of our lives if corporate Canada does not want to deal with us? When you look at institutional investors in this country, we would rather invest outside of Canada, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is good. There's problems around the world. There's Indigenous people around the world. But when you look at the issues in Canada on reserve, the lack of clean drinking water, the lack of access to services, why is that? Why are we not investing in our own country and improving the quality of lives? I would say that is systemic racism in Canada. And these are hard words to say, and they're harsh, but I believe it in my heart. And I know it because I see it. There's corporate Canada seems to think that to do business with Indigenous groups in Canada, there has to be an advantage just for corporate Canada. And I would say that is not the right way to go about this. There are partnerships to be had with Indigenous groups, with First Nations and Inuit across Canada and Métis across Canada that would advantage the country. So we must move past these stats that are real. So in my company that I lead, we manage about $2 billion in the mid-market in Canada. And we started doing Indigenous work in 2014. I was almost ashamed that we were not doing this type of work. We have a very, very diverse group here. 1/3 of our corporation is BIPOC, and that is by design. And you know the studies are out there, Harvard Business School, that when you look at public companies and you look at diversity with respect to public companies, the companies that are more diverse perform better than the less diverse companies. And that there are studies on this. So we've taken it very seriously here. And this is not a commercial for our small company called Bridging Finance, but I think it's a lesson to be learned across all companies, large, medium, and small, that diversity equals strength. Just want to talk about a couple of structural liabilities for Indigenous Canadians, and that's the Indian Act. Others here have spoken about it. Tabitha spoke about it. And the Indian Act, the one provision we didn't talk about is, and it's systemic racism, in my humble opinion, is that, and a lot of Canadians don't know this, is that you cannot use your land as a First Nation or property within a First Nation as collateral. So imagine us as Canadians, and we all have the dream to own our own homes. That is the Canadian American dream. You buy a home, you have a family, you have a happy life. How do you create that wealth? You get a mortgage and you buy a house and you try to pay off that mortgage. If you're a First Nation, there's that inherent systemic racist provision in the Indian Act. It probably started, the Indian Act was put in place in 1876. And others on this panel will probably know better than I, but I think this provision has been in the Indian Act since 1876. You must not use your property to create wealth within First Nations. That is paternalistic, that is antiquated. And I just have no other way of looking at it. So we must work around this limitation. The banks have been very effective, the financial institutions have been very effective in coming up with structures to provide financing to First Nations for projects. I will say this though, and I applaud the banks. We partner with banks, but when you look at small and medium-sized business, especially in finance, it hasn't been as prolific. It just has not. And you must find ways to get around this limitation. And we have, as a smaller corporation, we've come up with structures to lend money to First Nations and Inuit, knowing that we have the limitation that you cannot take security on reserve. And so what I would say that, you know, the banks do provide and the credit unions and other institutions provide capital to First Nations, but there's an issue in this country with timely access to capital. You know, we still have a northern climate, and we have seasons, and we have short building seasons, and there's often promises made to First Nations that, yes, we're going to provide you the capital for a project. Food security would be an example. And you wait and you wait, and if you miss that building season, usually turns into 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 in my estimation, and what I've seen in my experience. And you're not going to build that grocery store. You're not going to have that pharmacy. You're not going to have that security. You're not going to have those houses. So I go across this country and I look at children, and it really breaks my heart when I look at these children in communities. It can be in the South, it can be in the North, it can be in my community where I go every weekend to be with my people, and you see these children and you know the stats, and it really, and it sounds terrible to say this, but you look at these kids and you say, you're not going to finish high school. You're not going to, you might commit suicide. And just because there's a lack of food security and housing security in this country. Why don't we have clean water? Why don't we have safe houses for Indigenous people? So imagine if you're a little one and you're going to school and you're in a house that is full of mold and is decrepit, and you're 4 or 5 families, because in every community in this country, including my community, this 2 hours east of Toronto, there's a long list, a long lineup for houses. And so you have 3 or 4 or 5, 6 families in a house. So that kid's supposed to get up in the morning and go to school and be productive. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen until we have that security for our children. And somebody said here tonight, it's all about our children and having a better future for them. So we as Corporate Canada, we have a duty to include and not exclude First Nations, Indigenous people in the economy. It is our duty. Now, I'll just tell you a little bit about my experience here at Bridging Finance. I lead this corporation, and we have a lot of well-meaning people. We only have 3 Indigenous people. We're looking for more. If you're out there, come and talk to me. We only have 3 Indigenous people, but as I told you, about a third of the corporation is BIPOC. And I said in 2014, I said, we're going to start doing First Nations financing. And my goodness, my employees, my very own employees looked at me, very well-meaning people, like I had 3 heads, and they fought me. We're not going to do this. And they came up with all the same stereotypes. Well, it's not good business. They told me all the problems instead of the solutions. And to me, that was very disappointing. So what did we do to overcome this? We brought in elders. We trained our folks. We talked about ceremony. The fear of corporate Canada in the majority of Canadians are so fearful of Indigenous people. And I talk to a lot of leaders, and they'll say, well, if I go into the community, what do I say? What do I call the chief? I said, well, you call the chief chief. That's a good start. What if I have to smoke the pipe? What if I have to do a sweat lodge? What if I have to smudge? And it's just the general fear of the unknown. And for all of our leaders here, come and do a sweat lodge. It'll be the most invigorating experience that you would have. And I take corporate captains, men and women, to do sweats, because you learn about our culture and you learn about our people and the passion of our people. And I just want to wrap up with an example of a recent transaction where he said, how are we going to improve the quality of lives of Indigenous people? And it's Clearwater Seafood. They're friends of mine, the owners, from John Risley to Colin McDonald and Mickey McDonald. And it just so happens that because 20% of our business is Indigenous business here at Bridging Finance, that all 13 Mi'kmaq nations in Nova Scotia are partners of ours. And so we're proud of that. We're creating wealth, we take risk, and we create jobs. So I happen to have the luxury to travel to Nova Scotia and speak to the owners of Clearwater. And I knew they were going to sell the company. And so we were in the midst of the transaction now, where they are. And I implored them. in my little small part, implored John Risley. I said, please, you could sell your corporation, this massive global seafood company, to anyone. The pension plans will line up, the banks will line up. It is your duty. It's your duty to have First Nations involvement. And they're very, very smart individuals, but you know what? They're caring Canadians and they're caring individuals, and they want it to be inclusive. And it took some time. So I flew there and I sat with them. I brought in Indigenous leaders and I said, we must do this. This is how we create wealth for successive generations. And all the credit goes to the McDonald brothers and John Risley, because you know what? They put their money where their mouths are and they did this transaction. You know what that means for the Mi'kmaq people of Nova Scotia? That means multi-generational inclusion and wealth. And it trickles down. It's not just about the money, it's about the programming. It's about money going back into schools, going back into food security, housing security, books, education. You know, there's only two ways I know as an Indigenous person that we can better ourselves. And I'm probably limited in my view. There's two ways. That's economic reconciliation and education of our little ones. And you know what? All of our Indigenous people, we can all go back to school and learn. So I'll stop with that. I could probably go on for a long time. I'm passionate about this. We need other leaders to be very passionate about inclusion. It will make Canada a stronger country, and we must remove this blight. So I am so happy to learn from Diabo, from Wes, who's a dear friend of mine, and I thank them for including me. We need to be included in this initiative because the parallels between Black Canadians and Indigenous Canadians are just uncanny, and we will better ourselves, we will improve our quality of lives, and we want to be part of this economy. So thank you.
Thank you so much, David. You know, you've talked about a lot of really important points. You know, you've spoken about stereotypes. You've spoken about racism on a daily that these communities, and specifically Indigenous and Black communities, face. You've brought us back to the basics: housing, fair access to education, fair access to employment. How do we get there? How do we ensure that these communities are not only surviving, but that they have the hope to thrive and get there? And so, you know, I've done the blanket exercise a very long time ago. And I swear to you, it was one of the most powerful moments of my life. I remember, and I come from Somalia, right? I come from a war-torn country. And I remember being on these blankets, you know, and I don't know if there's a representation with the blankets and sort of the story, but I remember standing on these blankets and thinking, how did we get here? How did this happen? And as we moved along, the blankets kept disappearing, and the people kept disappearing, and the history and the contributions kept disappearing. And I thought to myself, we're here, and the way that we got here is not even known. We don't even know how we got here. And so I remember doing that exercise and thinking, there has to be something that we can all do. And so that sense of duty does really sit with all of us. And so I know that there's so much that you can all probably say, but we do have a couple of questions. And I'm also conscious of time as well. And so I'll pose the first question, which is Wes. Wes, there is someone that is asking a question around an update to the committees that the Black North has created and some of the work that's happening there. And so, Wes, if you can answer that question.
I'm not on my, get mute. Deborah, I think you should. Yeah, for some reason I can't get my camera on. If the host could just unmute, get my camera working so people can see my handsome face. There you go. Thank you. Yeah, we have 12 committees that we have as part of the Black North Initiative. We have that deals with different systemic barriers that Blacks face in this country. And by the way, may I add that David mentioned that he's a part of the Indigenous Observer Committee and he's on the board of Black North. The reason why we have the collaboration with the Indigenous community is that we would like to use the Black North Initiative as a playbook, and we would like to have as many Indigenous members as possible, leaders as possible, be a part of that initiative so that they can see how we're building the Black North Initiative, and then use that exact same playbook in the Indigenous community as well. So if we can get, if we can start with, you know, how did we do it in the Black community? What are some of the lessons learned? What are some of the mistakes that we've made, so that we can essentially have something polished, complete, and hand it to the Indigenous community and say, we would like to now work with you to implement those things that actually worked in the Black community. So it's not really, we're working in conjunction with each other to solve a common problem that we have. So we have 12 committees that we've set up. And the reason why we have those committees is because it's well and good for us as business leaders to say we're going to solve problems of anti-Black racism in our own companies. But we also recognize the fact that our Black and Indigenous employees must now leave our company and go home to their families. So when they're driving home, are they unnecessarily harassed and their civil rights violated when they're driving home? When they access the healthcare system, are they treated differently? When their kids go to school, are they treated differently? And knowing that there is biases in those different areas in our society, as business leaders, we'll use our collective clout and power to influence change in those areas. So those committees that we have set up, education, healthcare, economic empowerment, and so on, it's really about examine the systemic barriers that exist in those areas and actually recommend policy changes to the powers that be, in many cases, the politicians, to really implement a number of those changes. In addition to that, in the corporation, for example, we know companies are now thinking about diversity policies, right? So we can wait for the government to put those policies in place, or the companies can voluntarily put those policies in place and the legislation can follow later on. So when we talk, for example, about data, and Mark mentioned about data, well, it's illegal for you to go within your company and say, identify yourself or identify your race so we can keep race-based data, right? Why is that illegal? Because there's a view that it's discriminatory. Well, the people who actually put those policies in place, just like David mentioned about the Indian Act, they're not Blacks, they're not Indigenous. So as a result of that, they put these systems in place to protect us, but they're actually disenfranchising us as a result. So what we're saying now is that let's make sure that the people who are affected by the policies are involved in the decision-making so that we can identify those unconscious biases and those blind spots that we see. So as a result of knowing all that, we decided that we're going to work collectively. And it's not just Black people, as I said. We have Indigenous folks, we have people that don't, you look at this, this call, for example, many of the individuals on this are on the board of Black North or related to Black North. It's a common problem that we all have, and we're working collectively to solve the problem. Everybody is at the table dealing with the problem. And that's what we should be doing as a country, right? We have, listen, I love Canada. You know, I came here at 16 years old. I started from the bottom, and everybody that helped me along the way to get me where I'm at today, they were white people. I never met a Black person who was in a position to help me on my climb of that corporate ladder. We know we have good, decent people who give people opportunities because they see something in them that they would like to cultivate. The problem is, as a society, we're finding less and less of those opportunities. Less and less of people who take a chance on somebody that look different. Take a chance on an immigrant, take a chance on a minority. And we're saying that if we want to create a great Canada, we have to go back to how we were. You know, back in the 70s when my dad came, 1970, when my dad came here, he came here because of our immigration policy. And my dad was able to work at a factory, bought a home, sent his kids through university. Those opportunities don't really exist anymore. Where an immigrant person can come into this country, get an average job and buy a home and create wealth for himself and his family.
So we want to go back to those days when we give people those type of opportunities, and I think we can.
Thank you so much, Wes. You know, you've said so much, but you know, one of the things that I think is really important for us to sort of talk about when we talk about race-based data and when we talk about some of the realities of Black Canadians, I mean, the reality right now is that 83% of Black Canadians say that they're treated unfairly. 29% of our Black women do not have a family doctor. Even though in Toronto, you know, Black communities only make up 9% of the population, they represent 36% of cases involving pepper spray, or 37% of cases involving police strikes, or you know, over 30% of cases involving police firearm. We're expected to want and to need these communities to do well, to then come to work and then excel. And so what are companies and governments and entities doing to ensure that we're taking culture into account, that we're taking the realities of these communities? And if we go into some of these stats in Indigenous community, I mean, it's absolutely horrific. And so what do we do? How do we do this so that we are working in tandem? And so part of the work at Black North with our committees is to make sure that we have a very targeted approach. I mean, we have 12 committees, from housing to education, economic empowerment. You know, we go from at rise, we used to call it the at-risk youth, and we realized quite quickly that there is such a negative connotation to that. There's such a negative connotation. It goes back to David Sharp's point earlier on stereotypes and viewpoints of certain communities. And so we changed it to at-rise, which already empowers us as people. Yes, Mark, I see your thumbs up. You know, it empowers us to say to ourselves that we are not at risk. We're at rise. We're going to do what we need to do to empower and uplift our communities. And so, you know, it does start in a very targeted approach, but there's such intersectionality. I mean, we've spoken a lot with the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business around intersectionality. I mean, we know the Indigenous communities are very distinct, but so are Black communities. I mean, the United Nations a couple of years ago announced a decade for people of African descent. They said that the next decade will be dedicated to Black communities. And they did this research across the world. It was a global research done, and it was a global recognition that the state of Blacks across the world was in a state of detriment. And now we had to do something. And so if we are acknowledging to ourselves Indigenous communities are distinct, then we also have to acknowledge that Black communities are also distinct. And this is why we have some of these intersectionalities. And so I know that there are a lot of other questions, and I want to make sure that I get to the second question, and this will go to any of you leaders in this space. What advice might you have for business schools to create interest or to attract students from underrepresented peoples in business communities? How do we work with business schools so that they can start to create this interest in business?
I'm just going to put out one notion, and that's obviously by bringing in role models, you know, I can only speak from an Indigenous perspective of our Indigenous youth entrepreneurs, our economic development corporations. Let us share, you know, our learnings and our journeys. And, you know, the power of people working together is pretty amazing. And I know Alicia and Tabitha are part of this group on Facebook, but there's an Indigenous Women's Holiday Market, which got started. You know, how can we support Indigenous women, you know, during the holiday season and their small businesses? So I just had a quick look, and 23.5 members, you know, of that. And that's just from the power of Facebook, of encouraging, you know, these small entrepreneurs to showcase, you know, their businesses, and how can we lift and support them as we move forward. You know, that's what's happening in Canada today. So I suggest, again, look at role models. Obviously, there's so many across the country. You know, engage them, invite them in. Let's share. Let's have conversation. And even better, you know, what's a great opportunity for us to look at how we can partner with them and support, you know, other entrepreneurs and other business leaders as we move forward.
I agree. I think the other point to that, as far as role models go, is that we need to start seeing professors outside of Native study programs. I took STEM. I have a BSc with distinction in neuroscience. I'm a lawyer. I mean, there's all kinds of Indigenous talent out there, and we need to get them out of Native studies as professors and into mainstream education where we're teaching business, accounting, law, science, you name it.
Did Mark or David or Paul or Wes want to weigh in on how do we encourage business schools to encourage our youth to sort of get into that field?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we that it was so groundbreaking to have that course at Harvard, because it's really about Harvard Business School. It's really about teaching the next generation of business leaders about systemic racism, in particular in the workforce, and why they can be a solution to it. And because the problem is that, again, it's really about blind spots, right? And if we don't acknowledge the fact that there are barriers to entry for certain groups of people, and when they look around their classrooms, and I was privileged to be a part of the first course, and I was there, and it was kind of interesting because, my camera was off and they were teaching the course, and then the kids were taking apart my case study, and then the camera come on towards the end, and then they get to ask me questions, and we start to discuss it. And it's amazing the awareness that it creates and the debate that the class had that they would never have had before as a result of this. And now they're coming up with saying, how can I benefit if I'm the CEO, if I'm running a business? How can I benefit from all this talented people who are sitting on the sideline? How can I now create an opportunity for them so that I can make money as a result of people shying away from using these talented people? So I think that it really should be required. So things like those, a racial bias and so on should be required learning in business schools. It should be a required, just like French in high school, it should be a required learning so that when you get into the workforce and the next set of leaders get in there, they can change the culture that they inherited. Because all of us inherited a system that we have today. And we can either leave it as it is, or we can do something to reform the system. And, but sometimes when we benefit from the system so much, it's really hard to change something that you benefit from, right? And what people have said to me when I start to speak up is that, Wes, you got successful because of the system. So what are you talking up against the system for? Yeah, we get comfortable when the system works for us, but we have to recognize the fact that it doesn't work for everybody. And it's not a fair system. And if we recognize that, we're going to try to reform it as best we can.
David, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, thank you. One thing we found at the First Nations University of Canada and now at Queen's is that we have to start young. We go into the communities. I'm talking in the Indigenous context, and is very applicable to Black Canadians, Black youth, Black children, is that we're not expected to go to university. And it's just not talked about often in our homes. And I'm the same way. We come from a family where my mother has grade 8, my father has grade 9, and there was no expectation. So what we've done at First Nation University is we started having business camps. And we bring the kids in when they're in grade 6 and 7. Now we're doing it at Queen's. So I did that example from Saskatchewan. We brought it to Queen's, and we're bringing these kids in, and we're saying, you're going to stay in the dorms, and we're going to do a mini business program, a mini law program. And it's just creating that bug and that passion for learning, and say, this is accessible to you. You can be here. You're welcome here. And so if you do that, you create that expectation. And we really should continue to do that right across our institutions. Bring these children to our institutions and say, this is a safe place for you to learn. That's one way that I think we can make a difference. So at Queen's, we're bringing in all kinds of Indigenous kids. And unfortunately, we had to cancel this past summer because of COVID, but we'll be back at it hopefully next summer.
I would echo what David just said. I mean, I think, there's a whole opportunity around early education as to what a business career path looks like. And I don't think the challenge is lack of spots in the business schools. I think the challenge is that, there's a lot of people that kind of go through their early kind of 20s having no clue what a path and what a career trajectory can look like. And this is one of the things I've been finding as I kind of mentor more people, is that, you know, they don't have access to people like, you know, I was able to speak to my parents and they guided me, but they don't have access to that. And so, you know, even understanding like, why do you go to business school is something that, you know, a lot of people that even are people that are in great roles don't understand. And so there's a whole opportunity around education and mentorship and coaching on just what does a career path look like.
Yeah, I think what Paul just said is great. And I'd actually say the same thing, Dahabo, to what David said. I think we'd like to have all of you come speak to the education pillar, because this is actually part of what we've been talking about, this tiering where you start people young. And if we want to affect change in 10 years, this is where we have to be starting. There's everything from financial literacy conversations to how do we speak to young children about it, and all the way and moving through that. Because, you know, I spoke this summer to Trust 15, which is an amazing group in Toronto. And when we were speaking to them, some of these children, I'd say children, but they were actually kind of like teenagers, were unbelievable. Their questions were unbelievable. But sometimes you would stumble upon something. And I think what I took firmly from the group was, what I take as common knowledge may actually just be because of my education. And some of these questions seem so simplistic, but that's what we need to be educating towards, that everybody takes things for common knowledge so that they have that kind of subset that they can always take from and answer the simplest of questions. And I think that's where going into the community young, talking to people through their teens, talking to them through high school, then afterwards explaining what business school can actually help you with, that's going to be how we can really, at least why I was hoping to engage with Brian Porter into the education pillar for Scotiabank, is because we think that's really a great way to kind of make waves.
Anyone else that wanted to provide some comments around that question? Okay, so I'm conscious of time, and all of you beautiful people can probably give us a buckload of more recommendations and insights on the way that we can sort of move the needle, but we are running out of time. And for those of you that asked questions and we haven't been able to get to them, please know that we've noted them down. I'm going to ask all of you panelists to give us your final remarks around some of the thoughts that have been shared and sort of the path forward, and leave us with some inspiration, because we know that we, especially during this year and coming up to the end of the year, that we are going to need it. So I will start with Alicia.
Sure, thank you. This has been a fantastic conversation. I have to say I'm very interested in engaging with respect to the education conversation. I did not come from an educated family. I'm the first one to go to university. I was fortunate enough to watch my dad earn trades. I helped him with math when I was in school so that he could do that. And not having exposure and the ability to sit around the kitchen table and have a conversation about education creates significant challenges, and it sets people behind in a profound ways. And so I love that thought. The one thing about education is nobody can take it away from you. So, you know, if you're prepared to work, it's yours, you take it away, and nobody takes it away. And so it's truly empowering. And I think that that's a really important part of the conversation. Mentorship and sponsorship is also a very important part of the conversation. Nobody succeeds without champions. Nobody. Some people are born with champions sort of in their pocket and they have that tailwind, and others are born with headwinds and they need to sort of find those champions along the way. And so the beauty of education is that it often opens horizons and networks and allows for new realities to come to bear. So thank you, everybody, for the conversation and the real conversation, because we just don't have enough of it, I think, on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Alicia. David.
That's a very hard one to follow, Alicia. It's great to see my old friend, Alicia. I would just say very quite simply is be brave. We all must be brave and make a difference every day. And it's important that we do this. So as leaders, mentor, as Alicia said, that is crucial. I think Alicia got to where she is. And I know Alicia, we're friends. And I got to where I was because somebody believed. And our parents believed in us, but they didn't have any access. And they didn't have a quality of opportunity. And that is very difficult in this country. There is a lack of a quality of opportunity, and systemic racism is real. The thing about Canada is we do it with a smile on our face. And you don't know it's happening until it's just done and you're done. So please be brave, kick down doors for people, hire Black Canadians, mentor Black Canadians and Indigenous Canadians as well. We must make this a stronger country. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Fun?
Look, I want to thank Wes because the reality is that I read the article that he wrote in the Globe and Mail over the summer, and I, linked in him, and I was like, hey, I was really moved by your article, and I was like moved to tears, and he was like, well, why don't you join this Black North thing? And in many ways, like, it was the beginning of my journey, and so I want to be thankful to Wes because that's been pretty amazing. And look, I learned a ton today. I mean, I did not even know the CCAB existed. And so, there's a lot to learn. And I would say, I've really not delved into the Indigenous kind of, community other than through the creative side where I collect a lot of Indigenous art. But, I'd love to explore more the Indigenous kind of business community. And so, for me, that was kind of eye-opening today. I mean, just the stats of 31 billion and, between 50 and 60,000 businesses was really kind of, eye-opening and a big opportunity for our economy.
Thank you, Paul. Leanne, over to you.
Great. Thank you for just such a wonderful discussion. I wish it started at the beginning of the morning so we could just go throughout the day and keep on learning and learning. And I know that we'll have many conversations in the future about this. These are so important for Canada. I wanted to actually pick up on one note, because we are in the middle of a pandemic, and obviously lots of communities are starting to shut down, is I really wanted to talk about for our organizations, make sure that we make room for people to care for themselves. This has been such a challenging time. We see the increases of suicides and addictions and problems that are happening. And again, as corporate leaders, leaders within our communities, I really wanted to stress about us making room for people to care for themselves and their mental health. Overall, I think it's really important, and I really loved people's honesty today. So speak your truth. I think that's a really key thing for all of us. We should all recognize our power and our right to be part of these conversations and the role that we play in taking action. So it's about having these conversations that what are you going to do tomorrow, to make a difference, to make a change. Ask questions, gather people together. It's the actionable items. And the last piece is obviously for us to recognize our traditions and values and to stick to them and honor them. And thank you again for this wonderful time together tonight.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Mark, over to you now.
I know we're up on time. I'll just say a few things. One, it wasn't my point, but Leanne said something pretty special when you think the pandemic has brought about this mental health wave that we all need to address. And it's something you can talk about, and everybody's suffering from, it doesn't matter where you are in the chain or who you are or what you're doing. Everybody should be able to talk about it and ask people how they're doing. And you'll be surprised at the answers you'll get. I mean, anybody, ask a person you see passing in the street. I'm telling you, people are looking to talk right now. And we've seen it We've seen it so much, and we've seen it as such a big, now's the time. And if I could just say on one point, because we're getting up in time, a friend of mine, whose name is Dax Da Silva, he wrote a book called Age of Union. He talks about igniting the change maker. And really what he says is everybody can be a change maker. And it makes me think of the Gandhi quote that to be the change you wish to see in the world. And I think what you're seeing here is everybody thinks you need to be part of something. Well, we're all part of something, but on top of that, individually, we can affect change. And I think we have a really great chance here to make a difference.
Thank you so much, Mark. So this is the end of our panel discussion. I thank all of you for your thoughts and your perspectives and your honesty and sharing some of your personal stories. I think it's been incredible for me and everyone here to hear those, and we appreciate the way that you've done it. I think that it's important for us to have honest and uncomfortable conversations, but know that we are getting to a place where we can make a difference. I read a story the other day about an astronaut who was looking at the world from the sky, and he remembers thinking, look how small the Earth is. Look how small everything is. And I am such a small part in this entire universe. And there was this sense of duty that came upon him that he said to himself, when I come back on Earth, I'm going to help as many people as I saw from where I was. And I remember thinking, if we can just look at the bigger picture and the global picture and the impact that we can have on our society, I think there's just this sense of responsibility that just generates in ourselves. And I think all of you have talked about this. You've all expressed it. You've all committed. And so thank you. And I wish you all a very good night. And I will pass it on to Peter to take us through the closing remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Dahabo, for your wonderful moderation role. I think you were really stellar and really bringing out some really key and fascinating, insightful points from our esteemed guests. I must say, on behalf of the Federal Anti-Racism Secretariat, the extent to which we are blown away by today's discussion. I must say that we also acknowledge that it's a historical discussion. If we think about it, the first time that the Government of Canada joins with esteemed leaders of the business community of Canada to focus in on the priorities and the need to further enhance, boost, unlock the incredible potential, talent, and transformative power of Indigenous and Black individuals and business people and businesses across Canada. This is historic, and we really need to take the time to acknowledge and celebrate what we've accomplished today. As many of you have mentioned, this is just the continuation, if not a first step, towards a greater collaboration, greater action that needs to be accelerated. I should mention that yesterday, and this is why this resounds with so many members of my team, members of my team and myself were tuned into a 4-hour town hall that was youth-led by Black youth from across Toronto, or from, and as they like to say, from the hood in Toronto, that were really focusing in on the spike of gun violence that they were experiencing in their communities. So amidst a really fascinating conversation, at times very sad and heart-wrenching, there was beauty, there was potential, there was an acknowledgement that so many young people are looking for, that are Indigenous and Black, are looking for opportunities, for career paths, for mentors. But unfortunately, due to lack of access, due to the barriers that exist, and that many of you have highlighted tonight, they are unable to fulfill their dreams. And so there's, again, a great opportunity based on what we're hearing, what we're doing, and what we're willing to do collectively to bring about the necessary systems change across the board so that systemic anti-Black, anti-Indigenous racism are just things of the past. So thank you, Wes. Thank you, Tabitha. Thank you, Dahabo. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, David, for joining us this evening, for sharing your wisdom and insight, and really contributing to the learning process. And we look forward to moving forward collaboratively with you as a Secretariat, as the Government of Canada, because there's so much that we can do together. Merci beaucoup à tout le monde. Thank you. Good night.